roaming alone. All her lovely companions are faded and gone. No flower of her kindred, no rosebud is nigh to reflect back her blushes, to give sigh for sigh. I'll not leave thee, thou lone one, to pine on the stem, since the lovely are sleeping. Go sleep thou with them. Thus kindly I scatter thy leaves o'er the bed, where thy mates of the garden lie scentless and.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy, Freeman and Macroom, Mr. Mayor, Brady family, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for us here in the bookshop to be at the launching of this book. 30 years ago, Mr. Brady, Lord of Mercy, told me what was anything in connection with our own family, and in fairness to him, he spared us, I think. But it's great that it's been launched here in Macroom, and thank you again for coming in such a bad day. I'll just ask the Mayor now to say a few words.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the launch of the Briar of Life. As you are aware, my father died 24 years ago. Get that over now. And everybody in Macroom knew he was writing this book. What he told them, everybody, and they were all waiting for this wonderful book to be written. People used to come down to the house and he'd read out some of the book to them. My father, as you'll see from the book, he was a man that had to know everything. Everything that went on, he had to know about it. He had to be into it and make his own decision on it. And always telling us little stories. There was one particular story I remember about him. It was back after the ambush. Macroom was under curfew. The local power station cut down. But Dad was at home in the rectory. Of course, he couldn't sit in all that darkness. He had to find out what was going on. So he made his way to the wall at the side of Castle Street. And there was dead silence. And then all of a sudden he heard footsteps. Somebody was coming with hobnail boots. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. And there was a shout from one of the tens. Halt, who goes there? Paddy Manning, sir. And what are you doing out during curfew? Here I was only arsing around, says Paddy. But all the wonderful stories he had. Anyway, after he died, I made an attempt to publish the book, but publishers weren't interested in it. The years rolled on, and then I suddenly realised there recently that being in my 80s, I could be meeting him sooner rather than later. So something had to be done about the book. So I asked my son Alan to investigate the possibility of getting it published. And he contacted self-publishers called Original Writing. Now, the help and advice and guidance we got from them was unbelievable. I knew then the book was going to be born. After that then, our trouble was, how are we going to sell the book? We published it ourselves. So we knew it had to be launched in Macroom. So we contacted my cousin Pat O'Connell, and Pat said he'd have a word with Martin Fitzgerald. And as a result, once Martin got in, he has launched today. I thank everybody who helped, but a special thanks to that great Macrompian, Johnny Murphy. And I'm delighted that Johnny's name will always be associated with the Briar Life. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Thank you. First of all, thanks very much for the kind invitation here today to the launch of this book. It's a great honour for me to welcome Professor Johnny A. Murphy here to launch the book, and the Brady family for the hard work they've put into getting this book published, and the people of Macroom a chance to read what's in it. So without any further ado, I'll ask Johnny A. Murphy to come to the stand and launch the book.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and the Brady family, I'm delighted to be here. As Ronald Reagan once said at his great age, I'm delighted to be anywhere. But I'm delighted to be back in Macroom, and for whatever occasion. And I've read the book when it was in proof, and was greatly impressed by it. Of course, I knew Stephen Brady. Stephen and Brady were my parents' generation, give or take 5 or 10 years perhaps. And as a schoolboy, I used to meet Stephen walking down Cork Street or vice versa. And I thought he was a very severe-looking man. But I obviously missed the glint in his eye, as the book reveals, many glints in his eye indeed. And then, of course, as other speakers have said, we all knew the book was there, and Stephen was a leading intellectual in Kitty Cronin's licensed salon across the way. And the book reveals indeed a very profound intellect, and of course, in the manner of his generation, extremely well read. What was the old saying? A mind well stocked with biblical, classical and literary allusions. And the book brings out that as well. It begins with a marvellous evocation of childhood, of an Edwardian childhood, in which his family seemed to be a kind of a Protestant cocoon, living quite independently of any wider community, with some marvellous individual pen portraits there of his aunts. He had a keen eye for what was happening historically, so to speak, so that in his childhood he saw King Edward and Queen Alexandra on their visit to Cork. And then as a young man in Macroom, he was in Williams's Hotel, now the Castle Hotel, the night that Michael Collins was there before the Béal na Bláth ambush. And he saw Collins in tremendous form, partying playfully with various people around the place. And that was a great memory to have as well. Stephen had a keen sense of the quirks and foibles of human nature, a keen sense of the ridiculous. He comes out in this book as being kind of caustic and irreverent, as well as I said, very erudite. And he would seem to have a great sense of the ribald and the Rabelaisian. Many of his anecdotes are salacious, and you would think this is a very kind of cynical person and so on. And then you come to the very tender love story towards the end of the book, which belies all the superficial impressions that he's at pains to give about himself, I think. He liked to project the idea that he was a hard man in that sense, above all human sentiment. But then he's revealed in the end of the book as a total softy when he falls in love with Brady Crimmon. And that's what buying the book for, I think, alone. That story of the romance which began around Cooleyhan, as so many romances did. And he ran into great difficulties, of course, because it was a mixed marriage. The son of the rectory, after all, marrying a Catholic girl from Macroom, that was set up to be full of difficulties. And the full weight, really, not alone of his father's church, but of the Catholic Church in the person of Dean Higgins, was brought to bear on the couple to stop their unlikely romance, so to speak. And nowadays, of course, there wouldn't be any great objection to mixed marriages. In fact, most sets of parents would be delighted to see their children getting married at all. But they were very different times indeed. I think he was a natural skeptic. There are people in all walks of life, even in the great ages of faith in Ireland, who were simply born with a kind of a skeptical outlook. You sometimes got that in people. When I was growing up, I remember the most pious people would suddenly say, I wonder is there anything in it at all? And Stephen had that sense very strongly indeed. And when he was asked once to comment on the ecumenical movement, he said it was no more than dog-collared bandits getting together at last to salvage what they could. And when he was a small boy, he saw the possibilities of piety, so to speak, because he met a clergyman who had just said that he had negotiated a difficult journey in his car, and Stephen nodded piously and said, safe in the arms of Jesus. And this reverend guy gave him a shilling or two for his piety. And Stephen concluded, there's money in religion after all. A great affection for Macroom, though he wasn't born here, a great affection for its people, its scenery, its characters above all, that struck the kind of quirky note in himself, so that he recounts with relish one of the wake stories. I'm aware of other wake stories in Macroom about famous wakes, but I like this one where there was apparently some row brewing at a wake he was in, partly the product of the liquor being passed around. And this man, who was at the wake and who was of a kind of a peaceful disposition, said, no lads, don't be fighting. After all, we came here to enjoy ourselves. And other stories which I heard before, but which deserve to be set down as well, notably the one about Henny Gontone. An older generation would remember who she is or would have heard of her. Like Stephen himself, I think she was a bit of a free thinker. She didn't have any great regard for the high and mighty of church and state. And I'm told there's a certain circle in Dante's Inferno being prepared nowadays for people whose mobile phones go off in the middle of the speech. And he recalls the famous story about Hanine going into Mescal's shop, where she inquired of the very pious gentleman behind the counter, how much is the cracked Jesus in the window? A marvellous punchline, absolutely. Now, more seriously, of course, he took an interest in the political, religious happenings around the place at a time of great political significance. And Protestants in Macroom were few in number. Perhaps Macroom had the smallest Protestant population of any of the County Cork towns, really. And from a mid-19th century level of 160, not very much, out of a population that time in the mid-19th century, perhaps 3,000, it declined in the 1926 census to only about 60 Protestants. And then on to mid-20th century, even still few. But as I recall it myself, and it's only a schoolboy's memories, my memory is that there were very good relations between the majority Catholic population in Macroom and their Protestant neighbours. Offhand, I just recall someone like Brian Baker, the electrician in South Square, who was enormously popular with his neighbours and his friends. Indeed, I remember being in school with a son of his. And Stephen, of course, was the son of the rectory, and there was a close alliance between the rectory and the castle, between the Reverend Brady and Lady Ardelon, and of course between, if you like, the rectory, Lady Ardelon, and the British establishment, notably the Auguries and the Black and Tans. And that brings us to the story of Kilmichael, where Stephen claims that the reason why Macroom was saved from Black and Tan reprisal after the ambush of Kilmichael was not because of the combined influence of Dean Higgins and the Reverend Brady, even though they were friends, and together must have been an impressive couple if they wanted to make political interest. No, he says that Lady Ardelon, partly because of her affection for Macroom, her interest in Macroom, I don't believe there's a very strong affection there. She was an absentee landlady after all. But she still had property interests in the town of Macroom, rental interests. And for these reasons, he claims that she interceded with the highest British military authorities in Ireland to stop any burning of Macroom in the wake of the Kilmichael ambush. All I can say about that is it's a very interesting story. It may well be true. It fits in with the other factors that I've talked about her interest in her properties and so on. But no historian can say it's true because somebody said it. There's a very powerful statement made by some historian: history is what the evidence compels us to believe. So I would like to see some documentary evidence, and must be somewhere in the military archives, that that was the reason why Macroom was spared, so to speak. More interesting from my point of view is, at the moment, there's a big debate going on among historians, journalists, about the extent of the sectarian interest, of the sectarian dimension in the War of Independence. To what extent were executions in various areas of County Cork motivated by a sectarian influence? There are people who are anxious to maximise that for their own reasons, who are inclined to say, yes, people were killed because they were Protestants. The more traditional historians or interpreters of history say, no, they weren't killed because they were Protestants. They were killed because they were spies or informers who happened to be Protestants. It's an ongoing argument. But in that connection, one of the most interesting things about Stephen's book is where he recalls, after the so-called Dunmanway massacres in April 1922, when something up to a score of Protestants were killed in Dunmanway on a particular weekend in April, he recalls the following morning a knock at the door of the rectory. And this, he says, gentleman of military appearance, a civvy, but civilian clothes, but a military appearance, asked to see his father, the rector. And when he got in, he assured the Reverend Brady that there was no need to worry that anything like the Dunmanway events would be replicated in Macroom. He could rest assured that would be so. And to make it certain of that, this gentleman, who happened to be a local IRA commander, appointed a guard, a warning guard, to set up presence in the gardens of the rectory. So there were people, volunteers were told night after night which one should be there to take care that there would be nothing untoward happen. In my family, my tradition was my father was one of those people. But the IRA commander in question was Charlie Brown, of a well-known Macroom family, brother of Dick Brown of Pound Lane, and Charlie and Tommy, who had a shop in Cork, and whose ancestors, ironically, were Protestants themselves. And here we have a local IRA man giving an assurance to the local Protestant rector that he's going to be okay. And I find that very interesting, because there was no doubt there was anti-Protestant feeling in the guts of many people. After all, it had been only a century since Maud of Wheneil had written her fiercely sectarian anti-Protestant poem, the Battle of Cockhamenia. But Brown belonged to that kind of real Republican tradition whereby Protestant, Catholic and the centre would be harmoniously united in Ireland. Very difficult dream to achieve. But he represented that tradition as distinct from the kind of the gut Catholic nationalism. And I think that's the most significant political story in the book. But it's a great book. I didn't want to emphasize any particular section of it. He has a very readable style. It's unputdownable, really. And it's great that the book was there in the end, that it came to life and was published. So congratulations are due all round, really, to the Brady family for their persistence in getting this book published. And I'm glad at so many levels to be here tonight and to be able to congratulate him in that regard. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you, Jackie, for all the work. Good evening, Jay.
Now,